Hello, everyone. From the Historical Faith Society, I'm Tim Mahoney, and a lot of you might not know this, but the Historical Faith Society is underneath the umbrella of Patterns of Evidence Foundation. And for a long time, I've been investigating the stories of the Bible, and this month we're focused on the making of a Exodus Explorer. How does that happen? And so I want to welcome Jim and Penny Caldwell. They are coming from, what part of the country are you calling us from?
We're from pretty much in the center of Louisiana right now.
Cajun country,
Yep.
right in the middle.
Right in the heart.
Well, I've known you since 2003. In fact, I got a call from, I believe it was a person by the name of Michael Rood.
Yep.
And Michael, I think he might have been in Jerusalem at the time, and he knew about you, and he said, hey, there's this couple that I want to tell you about. But it was pretty hush-hush material, at that time, because I don't know if you were still in the country or if you had gotten out. But what we're going to do is this month we're going to look at, what drove you and your family to get involved with looking for places of the Bible. And so, Jim, I know some of this story, but I'd like to just have you guys share a little bit about your life earlier on. You were from the South, and you were, I think, weren't you involved in building houses, or you were doing something, I remember.
Well, let me give you the quick rundown. At 19, I started in the industry. I am into the instrument, electronics, computer controls. I'm almost, in a couple of years, have 50 years in the industry.
And you're talking about the oil industry, right?
That is oil and gas industry, yeah, and chemical industry. So it is in automation, computers, and things that, I used to say, run the plants. Yeah. So I was there in 15 years with that company. Something happened in the process. I started building homes and energy efficient homes in the mid 80s. And, the economy went south in about 85. And so I started looking at options to go after and help our situation in the building industry. And my cousin had gone overseas to Saudi Arabia. We looked at it, and one of the advantages that he had was that he was on the compound where the Ras Tanura refinery was, that it was a bike ride to get to work. It was 2 hours for me to get to work every day and sitting in traffic on a bridge and getting home. And I never saw my kids because I was working 800, 900 hours a year on overtime. And it just weighed on me. He said, we have a place for you. Pretty soon before we knew it, I was saying to Penny, I'm thinking about moving to Saudi Arabia. she almost killed me. I don't know how I pulled it off, Tim. I really don't. I mean, we had no idea. We'd never been out the country, basically, other than do a little scuba diving. Yeah. My persuasion technique was to say, hey, we'll go for a couple of years, make enough money to come back and start a hardware store. Mm-hmm. And I would be a full-time builder at that point. So that was in 1988.
So in 1988, was that when you decided to leave, to pack up, sell everything, and head off to Saudi Arabia?
It was actually at the end of 87. I went over for 3 months and
came back and got me.
Saw it, what we were getting into. And I came back and they moved us lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, everything. They emptied the house and off we went. Mm-hmm. We had a home at Ras Tanura in the expatriate community. And for the first 3 months, she didn't have a passport, so she couldn't leave. But if she had, she'd have been on a plane elsewhere. As soon as she saw the country, it is the most bleak and arid and desolate place on the planet, Saudi Arabia. It was quite a change for us to do that. Right. And I have to believe, Tim, that this whole thing was orchestrated by God because of what ends up happening later on in the time we spent in Arabia. We were there for 12 years, not 2.
Yeah.
Like I originally promised.
Yeah. I mean, moving from, let's say, I would think a fairly wet and lush area of, were you living in Louisiana, Mississippi, or sometime in that area, somewhere in that area? Yep. Yeah, to the desert of Saudi Arabia. And the part of the country you were in Saudi Arabia, were you on the eastern side or on the western side?
Yeah, we were almost directly on the Persian Gulf. In fact, that's probably one of the things that enabled me to finally get used to being there. The Persian Gulf is quite beautiful. And the Ras Tanura compound where we actually lived was a really nice neighborhood, and all behind walls and everything. And on the compound itself, it was very beautiful. And we ended up just being in the first house we were there, just a few blocks from the beach. And the beach was really pretty. I mean, it kind of looked like Fort Walton Beach or Destin in Florida. You know, the sand was very white, the water was very blue, and that enabled me to kind of gel a little bit to be able to get accustomed to life there, because once we left the confines of that compound, it was just as Jim said, it was very bleak, very, very bleak desert. But it was interesting because within about 6 or 7 months of the time that we landed there, there were a few people that would go out in the desert camping, and we got hooked in with a group of people like that. And within the first 8 months we were there, we literally drove with a couple of other trucks from the Ras Tanura in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. We drove all the way up the pipeline road, which is what they called it, and took a trip all the way to Jordan in our truck. And it was as though from the moment we landed, we got into this desert mode. And I mean, as time went on, we could see the handwriting on the wall, so to speak, because we were becoming accustomed to how to live out in the desert for days at a time, and what you had to bring, and all of this sort of thing. And we literally, before the end of our 12-year stint there, had crisscrossed the entirety of the Arabian Peninsula in our truck, from top to bottom, from east to west. It was an utterly astonishing, amazing ride. I mean, there's just so much there that is profound, and we came to have a real love for that very bleak land, just a real love for it.
Yeah, I know. There's an attraction to the desert and to some of these locations. There's a feeling that you get when you're there that you can't explain. And nights in the desert, right? The nights in the desert are like no other because the sky seems so enormous.
Yes.
I want to talk about your children, because your children, how old were they when you headed off?
Oh gosh, Chelsea was barely 4 and Lucas was barely 6 when we landed there the first time.
They were very young. They grew up in Saudi Arabia. They call it their home even to this day.
They sure do.
Yeah.
They also had a deep love for going all these interesting places and staying out in the tent for 3, 4, 5, 6 days at a time, and being able to just roam freely in that wide open space. And just as you said before, that desert sky at night, there's no place like it.
Yeah. You also fell in love with the people of Arabia, in a sense. You enjoyed meeting them.
There's almost like a custodianship of the land, and particularly the first couple of years we were there, we were primarily traveling in the eastern province. There were a number of really ancient locations, Thaj being one of them, that perhaps we'd done a little bit of research and perhaps had some kind of biblical connections even over in the eastern province. So we were very interested to go to these places. And when we would stay out in the desert, the Bedouin were enormously friendly people. You know, we were always welcomed, especially out in the desert. The people who still choose to make their living there nomadically are very, very friendly people, very friendly.
So you're over there and doing your job and living in Arabia. And you mentioned a comment that you felt that God eventually, when you look back on your life, that there was a reason why you were there. So was there anything in particular that happened to you that caused you to think, well, maybe I'm here for more than one reason?
Well, let me set just a little bit of a stage. We were there that first couple of years, and everything was going just fine. And we had fallen in love with the desert. We had made a trip all the way down to Yemen. We had made trips all the way up to Northwest Arabia and over into Jordan and into Israel. And we were just blowing and going. And then one morning, we actually had some friends over, and it was the wee hours of the morning. And at the time, we didn't have anything other than the VOA radio. And our neighbor came bursting in our front door and said that Saddam Hussein was rolling tanks into Kuwait City. And that was very significant at that moment because we only lived about 180 kilometers south of the Kuwait border. And if he had continued on, he would have taken over the northern part of eastern Saudi Arabia. And of course, that's where all the oil fields at the time were. So this was highly significant. I'll fast forward you about a year or so later. We and myself and the kids were actually exiled out of the region while the first Gulf War raged on. But after that Gulf War, Jim came and got us. We went back and we landed back in Arabia in about July or so of 1990, and everything had changed due to that war factor. And it was a really awful time, and for us individually as well, because I had been out with the kids for almost a year, and quite honestly, that was an enormous financial strain. And because of the tensions in the region, we didn't know whether we should stay there, whether we should go. I wanted all of us to go home and get away from the whole thing, just due to the wartime footing, so to speak, but ended up staying. But by the end of November of 1990, we had some decisions to make, and it was basically financial. We were a lot of money in the hole from this whole war scenario, and we were trying to make a decision. Are we going to leave here? Are we going to go home? Or are we going to stay?
It's tough.
And
A real tough time.
during that period of time, Jim was working a 3 to 11 shift at the refinery. And I was able to drive on the compound. It was allowable for women to drive. And I went to pick him up one evening, about 5 minutes after 11 p.m., in the very early part of December of 1990. And he had had such an experience. I'll let him tell you about it. That experience is what shot us off like a rocket into exploration exodus.
Now, I'm a guy that's skeptical of people, that have visions and say this is that and that. So that evening got fairly late and I was tired, and I went into my office and it was dark in there. And the room, just a few lights on from LEDs and chargers and stuff like that. And I remember leaning back in my chair. I kind of kicked back and I looked up and there was a whiteboard in front of me. And suddenly, as if a switch clicked on and an old style movie camera started a projection on a wall on that white screen, I saw a scene pop up, a desert scene, and I was immediately drawn into it. And this was just incredible to me. I was completely blown away by what was happening. And I remember smelling smells, seeing the landscape, and saw a procession of men in robes coming toward me. Some of them carrying objects, others with a cart, with a ox pulling a cart, and these types of things. An old scene. And they're moving through the desert, and I see the guy that is leading them, one individual. He turns to me, and as if I can see him and he can see me. And I hear in my heart of hearts that this is the Ark of the Covenant, and we are taking it back to the place that it was built. It was like a calling. And suddenly it quit. So I quick-paced out of the refinery, saw her headlights coming down the road, and then that's where she picks it up and says, "What happened to you? What is going on?" I didn't even really know what the Ark of the Covenant. I knew about the Ark of the Indiana Jones movies and all this kind of stuff, but I had to go into the Bible and really research what it meant in saying it's being brought back to where it was built. What did that mean? And of course, ultimately ends up being that it was built at Mount Sinai. So this was December the 4th. So by this January the 1st, we were packing our bags, going incredibly,
actually just
going to Egypt, because we were going to go to Mount Sinai, and there was something there that God had told me to go find, and that basically began everything right there. And totally changed my life.
Quite honestly, Tim, at that given moment, we had no concept whatsoever that there was a controversial discussion that was already happening as to where the real Mount Sinai was. I mean, of course, everybody knows where Mount Sinai is, right? It's right over there in the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. And we had to get to the real Mount Sinai because the Ark of the Covenant was going to be there. And that's what set us off on this journey.
That's crazy.
All right. Well, this is a good place to stop, right? Because we're gonna pick this up again in our next session. Yeah, well, it sounds pretty crazy to me, Jim. But
that's the truth.
And so we're going to find out what happened, because we're going to be looking at, once again, this is we're going to looking at the making of an Exodus explorer, or should I say explorers, as the Caldwell family was on a journey to try to find out where is this Mount Sinai. We're going to unpack an awful lot here this month as we look at your life and the things that you've learned, the things that God has shown you, as we're looking at these different viewpoints about, well, where is Mount Sinai? And you're part of that testimony. Okay, well, we'll be back next time. Once again, this is Patterns of Evidence Foundation and our community of the Historical Faith Society, and thank you for being a part of this, everyone.